The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of Carlos Mendoza's small garage, like angry fists demanding entry. Drip, 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 water found its way through countless holes, creating a symphony of leaks that echoed through the cramped workspace. Carlos wiped the sweat from his weathered brow with the back of his oil-stained hand, his tired eyes reflecting years of struggle and unwavering determination. "Papá, when are we going home?" Diego's small voice cut through the mechanical sounds of the garage. The 10-year-old boy sat on an old wooden crate, his school uniform wrinkled and his backpack dangling from his thin shoulders. His innocent eyes held the same gentle warmth as his father's, but also carried a weight that no child should bear. Carlos looked up from the beaten-up motorcycle he was working on, his heart aching as he saw his son's patient expression. "Just a few more minutes, Mijo," he said softly, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who worked 18-hour days just to keep food on the table. "I need to finish this repair so we can buy groceries tomorrow." The garage was a testament to Carlos's resilience. Tools that should have been replaced years ago hung from makeshift hooks on the walls. Empty oil cans served as storage containers, and a single flickering fluorescent light provided barely enough illumination. Yet despite the poverty that surrounded them, there was something warm about this place, something that spoke of a man who refused to give up, no matter how hard life pushed him down. Crash. Thunder exploded overhead, causing Diego to jump and move closer to his father. Carlos instinctively reached out and placed a protective hand on his son's shoulder. "Don't worry, Pati Pequeño. It's just the sky having a conversation with us." Diego smiled at his father's gentle humor, but Carlos could see the concern in the boy's eyes. The same concern that kept Carlos awake at night, wondering how he would pay the rent, how he would afford Diego's school supplies, how he would manage to give his son the life he deserved. 3 years. It had been 3 years since Maria died, and Carlos still felt lost without her guiding light. She had been the dreamer, the one who believed things would get better. Now it was just him and Diego against the world, and some days, Carlos wasn't sure he was strong enough for both of them. The rain continued its relentless assault, and Carlos worked faster, knowing that every minute spent in the garage was another minute Diego had to wait in this cold, damp place. Instead of their small but warm apartment 6 blocks away, his calloused hands moved with practiced precision, tightening bolts and adjusting parts with the skill of someone who had been fixing things his entire life. But as he worked, Carlos couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Call it intuition, call it hope, or call it the desperate wish of a man who had been pushed to his limits. But tonight felt different. Tonight the storm seemed to be bringing more than just rain, and as if summoned by his thoughts, the sound of a motorcycle engine sputtering and dying cut through the noise of the storm, followed by the desperate revving of someone trying to restart their bike just outside his garage door. Carlos paused, wrench in hand, and looked toward the entrance through the rain-streaked window. He could make out the silhouette of someone struggling with their motorcycle in the downpour. "Stay here, Diego," he said gently, setting down his tools. "Someone needs help." Carlos pushed open the heavy garage door, and immediately the storm's fury engulfed him. Rain lashed his face like tiny needles, and the wind whipped his worn work shirt against his body. But there, under the dim streetlight, stood a figure that made him forget about his own discomfort entirely. A woman, soaked to the bone, stood beside an expensive-looking motorcycle that gleamed even in the storm. Her elegant clothes clung to her frame, and her long dark hair hung in wet strands around her face. But it wasn't her obvious wealth that struck Carlos. It was the look of pure desperation in her eyes. "Please," she called out over the howling wind, her voice carrying a note of panic that cut straight to Carlos's heart. "Please, I need help, my motorcycle. It just died, and I don't know what to do." Without hesitation, Carlos stepped into the storm. "Come inside," he shouted back, gesturing toward his garage. "Get out of this rain." Isabella Romero had never felt so helpless in her entire life. The woman who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions without blinking was now standing in a thunderstorm, completely at the mercy of a stranger's kindness. Her motorcycle, a top-of-the-line bike that cost more than most people's yearly salary, had betrayed her in the worst possible moment. She had been riding back from a charity event across town when the storm hit. What started as a few drops quickly became a deluge, and then her bike started making strange noises before finally giving up completely. Now she was miles from her penthouse, with no cell phone signal, standing in front of a garage that looked like it might collapse in the next strong wind. "Thank you," she gasped as Carlos guided her into the warmth of his workspace. "Thank you so much." Carlos quickly grabbed a clean shop towel, one of the few he had, and handed it to her. "Here, dry yourself off, you're freezing." Isabella accepted the towel gratefully, noticing how the man's eyes held genuine concern for a complete stranger. In her world, such unconditional kindness was rare. People were usually kind to her because of who she was, what she could do for them. But this man had no idea who she was, and yet he had rushed into a storm to help her. "Papá." Diego's small voice came from behind a workbench where he had been quietly watching. "It's okay, mijo," Carlos said softly. "This lady needs our help." He turned to Isabella, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, this isn't much of a place to wait out a storm. I don't even have proper chairs." Isabella looked around the modest garage, taking in the patched walls, the aging tools, the obvious signs of financial struggle. Yet there was something dignified about this place, clean despite its poverty, organized despite its limitations. No, this is perfect. You're saving my life." Carlos gestured toward an old but clean wooden crate. "Please sit. Let me take a look at your bike." As Isabella sat down, she watched Carlos work. His movements were confident and precise, despite the simplicity of his tools. There was an artistry to the way he approached the motorcycle, treating the expensive machine with the same care he would give to any other vehicle. "Beautiful bike," Carlos said, running his hand along the sleek frame. "What happened?" "I was riding back from an event," Isabella said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much about herself. "It started making strange noises about 10 minutes ago, then just stopped." Carlos nodded, already diagnosing the problem with the practiced eye of someone who had seen it all. "Sounds like it might be the fuel system. These high-end bikes can be sensitive to moisture. With all this rain," he trailed off, focusing on his examination. Isabella found herself studying this unexpected savior. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands bore the honest calluses of hard work, and when he spoke to his son, his voice carried a tenderness that made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "How much do you think it will cost?" she asked, though money was the least of her concerns. Carlos paused in his work and looked at her with kind eyes. "Let me see what's wrong first. Don't worry about the cost right now. The important thing is getting you home safely." In that moment, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, being cared for simply because she was a fellow human being in need. No ulterior motives, no hidden agendas, just pure uncomplicated kindness. And as Carlos dove deeper into diagnosing her motorcycle, Isabella began to understand that she might have stumbled into something far more valuable than she could have ever imagined. Chapter 3. Stories in the Night. The storm raged on outside, but inside the small garage, an unexpected warmth began to fill the space. Carlos worked methodically on Isabella's motorcycle while she sat nearby, gradually relaxing in the presence of this gentle man and his curious son. "The problem is definitely in the fuel injection system," Carlos explained, his voice carrying the confidence of years of experience. "Some water got into the tank during the storm. It's not uncommon, but it'll take a while to clean out properly." Isabella nodded. Though she understood little about motorcycles, what she did understand was the careful way Carlos handled each component, treating her expensive bike with the same respect she imagined he gave to every vehicle that came through his doors. "I'm sorry this is taking so long," Carlos continued, glancing up at her with apologetic eyes. "I know you probably need to get home." "Actually," Isabella said softly, surprising herself with her honesty, "I'm in no hurry." And as the words left her mouth, she realized they were true. When was the last time she had sat somewhere without checking her phone every 30 seconds? Without thinking about the next meeting, the next deal, the next crisis that needed her attention? Diego had been watching Isabella with the open curiosity of childhood. Finally, he worked up the courage to speak. "Are you a princess?" he asked innocently. Isabella laughed, a genuine, warm sound that seemed to brighten the entire garage. "No, sweetheart, I'm definitely not a princess. What made you think that?" "Your clothes are so pretty," Diego said simply, "and you smell like flowers, not like oil and metal like Papá and me." Carlos felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Diego, that's not polite to say." "It's okay," Isabella assured him, smiling at the boy. "He's right, I probably do smell very different from what you're used to." She paused, looking at Diego with genuine interest. "What grade are you in school?" "4th grade," Diego replied proudly. "I want to be a mechanic like my Papá when I grow up. He can fix anything." Isabella glanced at Carlos, who had stopped working and was listening to his son with a mixture of pride and concern. "That's wonderful. Your Papá must be very talented." He is, Diego said with absolute certainty. When Mama was sick, he worked 2 jobs to take care of her, and now he works all the time to take care of me. He's the strongest person in the whole world. A silence fell over the garage, heavy with unspoken pain. Carlos cleared his throat and returned to his work, but Isabella could see the way his shoulders tensed, the way his movements became slightly more hurried. "I'm sorry," Isabella said quietly. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Carlos replied, his voice steady but soft. "Maria died 3 years ago, cancer. Diego barely remembers her, but—" He trailed off, focusing intently on a particularly stubborn bolt. Isabella felt her heart constrict. Here was a man who had lost everything, and yet was still giving his time and skill to help a stranger. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Carlos nodded, accepting her condolences with the grace of someone who had learned to carry grief without letting it break him. She was the dreamer in our family, always believed things would work out, no matter how bad they got. "And now," Isabella asked gently. Carlos paused in his work and looked at Diego, who had moved closer to watch his father's hands move with practiced skill. "Now I try to believe for both of us." The simple honesty of his words hit Isabella like a physical blow. In her world of corporate boardrooms and strategic planning, she was surrounded by people who spoke in calculated phrases, who measured every word for maximum impact. But Carlos spoke from the heart, without artifice or agenda. "You know," Isabella said, watching Diego help his father by holding a flashlight steady, "I think your son is lucky to have such a dedicated father." Carlos smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Isabella had seen from him all evening. "I'm the lucky one. He's what keeps me going when—" He caught himself, seeming to realize he was sharing too much with a stranger. But Isabella wanted to hear more. For the first time in years, she was having a real conversation with someone who didn't know her net worth, her business achievements, or her social status. Someone who was simply talking to her as one human being to another. "When what?" she prompted gently. Carlos hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "When I wonder if I'm enough, if I can give him what he needs, what he deserves. Sometimes I look at other kids his age with their nice clothes and their computers and their trips to places I could never afford, and I worry that my love isn't enough to make up for what I can't provide." The vulnerability in his admission took Isabella's breath away. This man who had so little was worried about not giving enough, while people in her social circle who had everything were constantly complaining about what they lacked. "Love is everything," Isabella said firmly, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "Trust me on that." As Carlos returned to his work, and Diego continued to assist with quiet concentration, Isabella found herself thinking about her own life, her penthouse apartment with its breathtaking city views but its echoing emptiness, her successful business empire that commanded respect but left her feeling isolated, her bank account that could buy almost anything except the warmth and connection she was witnessing between this father and son. And for the first time in years, Isabella wondered if she was the one who was truly poor. As the hours passed, the storm outside gradually weakened, but inside the garage something beautiful was taking root. Isabella watched, mesmerized, as Carlos worked with a dedication that went far beyond simple professionalism. Every movement was deliberate, every decision carefully considered. He wasn't just fixing a motorcycle. He was practicing his craft with the reverence of an artist. "There," Carlos said finally, straightening up and wiping his hands on a clean rag. "Try starting her up now." Isabella moved to the motorcycle and pressed the start button. The engine roared to life with a smooth, powerful purr that hadn't been there before. The sound was perfect, better than perfect. It was as if Carlos had not only fixed what was broken but had somehow improved upon the original. "How much do I owe you?" Isabella asked, reaching for her purse. Carlos waved his hand dismissively. "The parts cost $43, that's all." Isabella stared at him in disbelief. $43? But you've been working for over 3 hours. "The work is free," Carlos said simply. "You needed help, and I was able to provide it. That's enough." No, that's not right," Isabella protested. "Your time is valuable. Your skill is valuable. Please let me pay you what this repair is actually worth." But Carlos shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, I saw how worried you were when you arrived. I could see in your eyes that you needed to get home. When someone needs help, you help them. You don't profit from their desperation." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. In her world, everything had a price. Every favor came with strings attached. Every kindness carried an expectation of reciprocity. But Carlos was refusing to take advantage of her vulnerability, even though his own financial situation was clearly desperate. "At least let me pay for your son's dinner," she insisted, "or buy him something he needs for school." "That's very kind," Carlos replied, his voice gentle but firm. "But we're fine, Diego and I, we take care of each other. We don't need charity." There was no pride or arrogance in his refusal, only dignity. Isabella realized that Carlos wasn't rejecting her offer out of stubbornness. He was protecting something precious, his integrity, his self-respect, the example he was setting for his son, Diego, who had been quietly observing this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Papa, can I show her the picture?" Carlos looked uncertain. "Diego, I don't think—" "Please." Diego's eyes were bright with excitement. "She's nice. I think Mama would have liked her." After a moment's hesitation, Carlos nodded. Diego ran to a small desk in the corner of the garage and returned with a framed photograph that he handled with the care reserved for precious treasures. "This is my mama," Diego said proudly, showing Isabella the picture. Isabella looked at the photograph and felt her breath catch. It showed Carlos younger and with happiness radiating from his eyes, standing next to a beautiful woman, with a warm smile and kind eyes that were remarkably similar to Diego's. Between them stood a much younger Diego, barely more than a toddler, grinning at the camera with innocent joy. But what struck Isabella most was the setting. They were standing in front of this same garage, but it looked different, cleaner, brighter, with a fresh coat of paint and a sign that read, "Mendoza Family Auto Repair. We fix it right." "She was beautiful," Isabella said softly, and she meant it. "She was everything," Carlos said, his voice thick with emotion. "She believed in this place, in me, in our dreams. We were going to expand, maybe open a second location someday. She handled the books, dealt with customers, made this place feel like home." "What happened to those dreams?" Isabella asked gently. Carlos looked around his run-down garage, seeing it through her eyes. "Medical bills when Maria got sick. Everything we had saved went to treatments, specialists, experimental therapies. I sold everything I could, borrowed against the business, maxed out every credit card. In the end, it wasn't enough to save her, and I lost almost everything else too." "But you kept the garage," Isabella observed. "I had to," Carlos said simply. "It's all I know how to do, and Diego needs a roof over his head and food on the table. Some days I think about selling it, finding a job working for someone else, but—" He gestured toward his son, who was carefully putting the photograph back in its place of honor. "This place is part of his history, part of his mother's legacy. I can't let that go." Isabella watched Diego arrange the picture just so, making sure it was positioned where he could see it, while he did his homework at the small desk. The love in that simple gesture, the way the boy honored his mother's memory while supporting his father's dreams, moved her more than any corporate presentation or charity gala ever had. "You're not going to lose this place," Isabella said suddenly. With a conviction that surprised even her, Carlos looked at her with gentle skepticism. "I appreciate the sentiment, but you don't know the full situation. The bank has been patient." "But no," Isabella interrupted, her voice carrying a strength that made both Carlos and Diego look at her with renewed attention. "I can see what this place means to you, to both of you. Some things are too important to lose." Carlos studied her face, seeing something there that he couldn't quite identify. "You sound like you speak from experience." Isabella nodded slowly. "I do. I know what it's like to lose something precious, and I know what it's like to fight for what matters most." As she prepared to leave, Isabella felt a profound reluctance to return to her old life here, in this humble garage. She had experienced something that all her wealth had never been able to buy: authentic human connection, selfless kindness, and the simple joy of being valued for who she was rather than what she owned. But she also felt something else stirring within her, a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life for far too long. Carlos and Diego had given her an unexpected gift tonight, and Isabella was determined to find a way to give something back, something that would change all of their lives forever. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and fresh with the scent of new beginnings. Isabella stood beside her perfectly repaired motorcycle, reluctant to start the engine that would carry her back to her other world, a world that now seemed hollow and artificial compared to the genuine warmth she had experienced in Carlos's garage. "Are you sure you can find your way home?" Carlos asked, his concern evident in every word. "The streets can be confusing at night, especially after a storm like this." Isabella smiled, touched by his continued care for her well-being. "I'll be fine. I have a good sense of direction." She paused, looking at Diego, who was yawning beside his father. "It's getting late. You should get this little one home to bed." "In a few minutes," Carlos replied. "I want to make sure you get started safely first." The simple consideration in his words made Isabella's chest tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had put her needs before their own convenience? In her world of board meetings and business dinners, such genuine concern was extinct. "Carlos," she said softly, "I want you to know that tonight meant more to me than you could possibly understand. You didn't just fix my motorcycle, you reminded me that there are still good people in this world." Carlos looked puzzled by the intensity of her gratitude. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Isabella said firmly. "That's where you're wrong. Most people wouldn't have helped a stranger in a storm. Most people wouldn't have worked for hours for practically nothing. Most people wouldn't have shared their food and their warmth with someone they'd never met before." She knelt down to Diego's level, her expensive suit completely forgotten. "And you, young man, are lucky to have such an incredible father. Take care of him, okay?" Diego nodded solemnly, then surprised Isabella by wrapping his small arms around her neck in a spontaneous hug. "Thank you for being nice to us," he whispered in her ear. Isabella felt tears threaten to spill over as she hugged the boy back. In her penthouse apartment, she had rooms that cost more than most people's homes, but she had never felt as rich as she did in this moment, holding this precious child who had so little but gave so freely. "Here," Carlos said, pressing a small piece of paper into her hand as she stood up. "My card. In case you have any problems with the bike, sometimes after a repair like this, small adjustments need to be made." Isabella looked at the simple business card. "Carlos Mendoza, motorcycle and auto repair. Honest work, fair prices." She carefully tucked it into her purse, knowing it would become one of her most treasured possessions. "I hope we meet again," she said, meaning it more than she had ever meant anything in her life. "Maybe," Carlos replied with a gentle smile. "The world is smaller than we think sometimes." As Isabella rode away, her motorcycle purring smoothly beneath her, she couldn't stop thinking about the man and boy she was leaving behind. The image of Diego's trusting smile and Carlos's calloused hands working with such skill and dedication was burned into her memory. By the time she reached her penthouse building, 43 floors of steel and glass that commanded a view of the entire city, Isabella had made a decision that would change everything. The doorman greeted her with professional courtesy. "Good evening, Ms. Romero. I trust your evening went well." "Better than you could imagine, James," Isabella said, surprising him with the genuine warmth in her voice. In her apartment, surrounded by artwork worth millions and furniture that belonged in museums, Isabella felt more alone than she ever had before. The contrast between this sterile perfection and the humble warmth of Carlos's garage was stark and painful. She walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the city spread below her. Somewhere out there, Carlos was probably putting Diego to bed, maybe reading him a story or helping him with homework, simple, precious moments that her wealth had never been able to buy. Isabella moved to her home office and sat at her mahogany desk, a piece that had once belonged to a railroad baron and now served as the command center for her empire. She opened her laptop and began to research, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the focused intensity that had made her one of the most successful businesswomen in the country. "Carlos Mendoza," she typed, followed by his address and business information. Within minutes, she had a complete picture of his financial situation, and it was worse than she had imagined. The garage was 3 months behind on rent. Medical bills from his wife's treatment were still being paid off in tiny increments. Diego's school fees were barely covered, and there were past due notices for utilities stacked up like autumn leaves. But as Isabella dug deeper, she discovered something that made her heart race with excitement and admiration. Despite his crushing financial burdens, Carlos had an impeccable reputation in his neighborhood. Customer after customer had left glowing reviews online, praising not just his skill, but his honesty, his kindness, his refusal to overcharge even when he desperately needed the money. "This man refuses to take advantage of anyone," one review read. "He could have charged me 3 times what he did for the work on my car, but he only asked for the cost of parts. There are no mechanics like Carlos anymore." Another review made Isabella's eyes fill with tears. "Carlos fixed my daughter's bike for free when she crashed it. He said every child deserves to ride, and he couldn't stand to see her crying. This man has a heart of gold." Isabella sat back in her leather chair and stared at the screen. She had found something precious and rare, a truly good person living a life of quiet dignity despite overwhelming challenges, and now she had the power to change his story. But how could she help without destroying the very integrity that made Carlos so special? He had refused her money earlier, and she knew that any obvious charity would be rejected with the same gentle firmness. Isabella smiled as an idea began to form in her mind, an idea so perfect, so elegant in its simplicity, that she knew Maria would have approved. It was time to return the favor, but in a way that would preserve Carlos's dignity. While transforming his life forever, tomorrow, she would begin to set her plan in motion. Isabella's alarm clock had never been necessary. She typically woke before dawn, her mind already racing with the day's challenges. But this morning was different. This morning she woke with a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life for years. She dressed carefully in one of her simpler business suits, choosing understated elegance over obvious wealth. Today's mission required a delicate touch, and Isabella knew that success would depend on her ability to appear as just another potential customer rather than the billionaire heiress she actually was. Her first stop was the office of Martinez and Associates, one of the city's most respected private investigation firms. Isabella had used their services before for business matters, but never for anything this personal. "I need a complete background check," she told Detective Martinez, sliding Carlos's business card across the polished desk. "But this isn't about criminal activity or business fraud. I need to understand this man's life, his character, his situation, everything." Martinez, a seasoned professional who had learned not to ask too many questions, simply nodded. "How quickly do you need this?" "By tomorrow morning," Isabella replied. "Cost is no object." Her next stop was the offices of Romano Construction, the company that had built half the city's commercial district. Isabella had done business with them before, and she knew they owed her several favors. "I need a complete renovation plan," she explained to Tony Romano, spreading out the photos she had discreetly taken of Carlos's garage with her phone. "I want this place transformed, but it has to look like a gradual improvement, not a sudden windfall." Romano studied the images with a contractor's experienced eye. "This place has good bones," he mused, "with the right work. It could be something special, but why the secrecy?" Isabella smiled. "Let's just say I believe in rewarding good people for being good." Her third meeting was with her own legal team, where she outlined a plan so complex and carefully constructed that it took 3 lawyers working together to make it legally sound. "You want to create what is essentially a fictional benefactor?" her head attorney asked, his eyebrows raised in confusion. "Not fictional," Isabella corrected. "Anonymous. There's a difference. The help will be real. The money will be real. The improvements will be real. The only thing that won't be real is the story about who's providing it." That evening, Isabella returned to Carlos's neighborhood, but this time she parked several blocks away and walked. She wanted to see the area through different eyes, to understand the community that Carlos was part of. What she discovered both heartened and saddened her. The neighborhood was poor but proud, with families who had lived there for generations. Children played in the streets under the watchful eyes of grandmothers sitting on porches. Small businesses struggled to survive, their owners working long hours for small profits. And at the center of it all was Carlos's garage, where she could see him through the window working late into the evening while Diego did homework at his small desk. The sight of them together, father and son supporting each other through their challenges, reinforced Isabella's determination to help. But she also saw something else. Carlos was beloved in this community. People stopped by just to chat. Children waved to him as they passed. Elderly neighbors brought him home-cooked meals. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a pillar of this neighborhood, a person people counted on. Isabella realized that her plan had to be perfect. If she made a mistake, if Carlos discovered her identity and felt manipulated, it wouldn't just affect him. It would ripple through this entire community that depended on his steady presence. The next morning, Detective Martinez delivered his report and Isabella read it with growing amazement. Carlos's life was an open book of integrity and sacrifice. He had turned down higher-paying jobs that would have required him to move away from Diego's school. He had refused to declare bankruptcy, even when it would have been financially smart. Because he felt obligated to pay every debt he owed, he volunteered at the local youth center, teaching kids basic automotive skills. But the most touching discovery was a savings account with exactly $847.23 in it, money Carlos was setting aside, $5 or $10 at a time for Diego's college education. At his current rate of saving, it would take him 40 years to accumulate enough for even a single semester, but he never missed a deposit. Isabella stared at that number for a long time, $847,023. She spent more than that on a single lunch at her favorite restaurant, but to Carlos it represented hope, sacrifice, and an unwavering belief in his son's future. "This ends now," Isabella whispered to herself. This man's struggles end now. She picked up her phone and made the call that would set everything in motion. Mr. Romano, it's Isabella Romero. I want you to start the project immediately, and I want to add something to the plan. I want you to discover that the garage is sitting on a small oil deposit that needs to be cleaned up. Environmental regulations will require the city to compensate the owner for the cleanup costs. Make sure that compensation is exactly enough to cover all of Mr. Mendoza's debts and leave him with a substantial safety net. Miss Romero, Romano said slowly, there's no oil deposit under that garage. Isabella smiled. There will be by the time your geological survey is complete. I own 17 petroleum companies. Mr. Romano, creating an oil deposit that needs immediate cleanup is well within my capabilities. As she hung up the phone, Isabella felt a thrill of excitement. She was about to orchestrate the most elaborate act of kindness of her life. And the best part was that Carlos would never know it was anything other than an incredible stroke of good fortune. But Isabella was about to learn that the best-laid plans often have consequences that no one can predict. 3 weeks later, Carlos stood in the middle of his garage, unable to believe what he was seeing. The transformation was so complete, so miraculous, that he kept expecting to wake up from a dream. The new equipment gleamed under bright LED lighting that had replaced his single flickering bulb. Professional-grade tools hung in organized displays on freshly painted walls. The concrete floor had been resurfaced and polished to a shine that reflected everything like a mirror. Even the corrugated metal roof had been replaced with proper insulation and materials that would keep the space warm in winter and cool in summer. "Papa, is this really our garage?" Diego asked, his voice filled with wonder as he ran his small hand along a brand-new workbench. "I still can't believe it," Carlos replied, his voice thick with emotion. "When the city inspector told me about the environmental cleanup compensation, I thought there had to be a mistake. The story had been almost too good to be true. A routine geological survey had discovered a small oil deposit beneath his garage that required immediate cleanup under environmental protection laws. The city had not only paid for the cleanup, but had provided compensation that covered all of Carlos's debts and left him with enough money to completely renovate his business. And the best part," Carlos continued, pulling Diego close for a hug, "is that we get to stay here. This is still our place, our home, your mother's legacy, but now we can build on it. Make it everything she dreamed it could be." The new sign outside read, "Mendoza Family Auto Repair. Excellence in every detail." And already word was spreading through the neighborhood. Carlos's reputation for honest work, combined with his new professional facilities, was drawing customers from across the city. "Mr. Mendoza," a voice from the garage entrance interrupted his thoughts. Carlos turned to see a woman in an elegant business suit standing in his doorway. She looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place her. "Yes, can I help you?" Carlos asked, wiping his hands on a clean shop towel. Isabella Romero stepped into the garage, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. She had stayed away for 3 weeks, watching from a distance as her plan unfolded perfectly, but she could no longer resist the urge to see Carlos's reaction firsthand. "I heard you do excellent work," she said, trying to keep her voice casual. "I was hoping you might take a look at my motorcycle." Carlos studied her face, and Isabella could see the moment recognition dawned in his eyes. You're the woman from the storm, the one with the broken bike." "Isabella," she said, extending her hand. "I never properly introduced myself that night." "Isabella," Carlos repeated, shaking her hand warmly. "What a coincidence. I was just thinking about you yesterday, wondering if your motorcycle was still running well." He gestured around the transformed garage with obvious pride mixed with bewilderment. "As you can see, things have changed quite a bit since that night." Isabella looked around the garage, feigning amazement at the transformation she had orchestrated. "This is incredible what happened." Carlos launched into the story of the environmental cleanup, his voice filled with excitement and disbelief. As he spoke, Isabella watched his face light up with hope and possibility, emotions that had been absent that stormy night 3 weeks ago. "It's like a miracle," Carlos concluded. "Just when I thought I might lose everything, the universe decided to give us a second chance." "The universe," Isabella repeated softly, "has a way of rewarding good people." Diego, who had been quietly observing from his homework desk, suddenly looked up with bright recognition. "Hi, you're the motorcycle lady, the one who smells like flowers." Isabella laughed, the same genuine sound that had warmed the garage that stormy night. "That's right, I'm the one your papa helped when I was caught in the rain." "Papa helped you?" And then good things happen to us, Diego said with the simple logic of childhood. Maybe helping people is like planting magic seeds. The innocent wisdom of his words hit both adults like a physical blow. Carlos looked at his son with wonder, while Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. Maybe it is. Pequeño, Carlos said softly. Maybe it is. Isabella knelt down to Diego's level, her heart full to overflowing. You know what? I think you're absolutely right. And I think your papa has planted more magic seeds than anyone I've ever met. As she stood back up, Isabella caught Carlos watching her with a strange expression. There was recognition there, but also something else. A dawning awareness that made her pulse quicken with nervous anticipation. Isabella, Carlos said slowly, can I ask you something? Of course. That night when you said you worked in business, what kind of business? Isabella felt her carefully constructed story beginning to crumble. She had been so focused on helping Carlos that she hadn't prepared for this moment. The moment when her two worlds would collide. I work in investments, she said carefully. Which was technically true, Carlos nodded, but his eyes remained thoughtful. And your last name? Isabella's mouth went dry. She could lie, continue the deception, maintain the beautiful fiction that had allowed her to help this wonderful man. Or she could tell the truth and risk destroying everything they had built. Romero, she whispered. The color drained from Carlos's face as the name registered. Even in his working-class neighborhood, everyone knew the name Romero, the business empire, the charitable foundation, the woman who had inherited billions and used her wealth to reshape the city's skyline. Dios mío, Carlos breathed. You're Isabella Romero, the Isabella Romero. Isabella nodded, unable to speak as she watched the man who had shown her such kindness grapple with this revelation. That night, Carlos said, his voice barely a whisper, I fixed the motorcycle of one of the richest women in the world, and I charged her $43. And you wouldn't let me pay you more, Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion. You saw someone in need and you helped, without knowing who I was or what I could do for you. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious? Carlos stared at her, and Isabella could see his mind working, putting pieces together. The cleanup, the oil deposit, the compensation that was exactly enough to solve all my problems. Carlos, there was no oil deposit, was there? His voice was quiet, but Isabella could hear the pain beneath the words. Isabella felt her carefully planned moment of triumph crumbling into something much more complicated. Carlos, please let me explain. You did this, he said, gesturing around the transformed garage. All of this, the miracle wasn't from the universe, it was from you. Yes, Isabella admitted, her voice breaking. But Carlos, you have to understand. Why? The single word carried a weight of confusion, hurt, and something that might have been betrayal. Isabella took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine the fate of the most important relationship she had formed in years. Because that night in your garage, you gave me something I had been searching for my entire life, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. You treated me like a human being, not like a business opportunity, not like a networking contact, not like someone who could do something for you, just like a person who needed help. She stepped closer to Carlos, her heart breaking at the conflict she saw in his eyes. You shared your food with me when you had barely enough for yourself and Diego. You worked for hours and refused to profit from my desperation. You let me into your family's most sacred space and shared your most precious memories. And when I tried to pay you what the work was actually worth, you refused because you said helping people wasn't about profit. Isabella's voice grew stronger as the truth poured out of her. Do you know what my life is like, Carlos? I live in a penthouse that's bigger than this entire block. I eat at restaurants where a single meal costs more than most people make in a month. I'm surrounded by people who pretend to care about me, but really only care about what I can do for them. I haven't had a genuine conversation with another human being in years. She gestured toward Diego, who was watching the adults with wide, concerned eyes. And then I met you and your son, and I saw what real wealth looks like. It's not money, Carlos. It's integrity. It's love. It's the way Diego looks at you like you hung the moon, and the way you work 18-hour days just to give him a better life. It's the way you honor your wife's memory by living the values she believed in. Carlos remained silent, but Isabella could see that he was listening, really listening. I didn't help you because I pitied you, she continued. I helped you because you deserved it, because in a world full of people who take advantage of others, you choose kindness, because when life knocked you down harder than anyone should have to endure, you got back up and kept going, because you're raising a son who thinks helping people plants magic seeds, And in a way, he's absolutely right. Isabella wiped her tears and looked directly into Carlos's eyes. I'm not sorry I helped you. I'm only sorry I had to deceive you to do it. But Carlos, I need you to understand something. Everything you've accomplished here, all the success that's coming your way, you earned it. Not because of my money, but because of who you are. I just removed the obstacles that were keeping the world from seeing what I saw that night. The garage fell silent, except for the soft hum of the new ventilation system. Diego looked between the two adults, his young mind trying to process the complex emotions swirling around him. Finally, Carlos spoke, his voice quiet but clear. That night, when you left, I told Diego that sometimes angels come disguised as people who need help. I thought you were the angel, he paused, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. I never imagined I was wrong about which one of us was doing the helping. Isabella felt her knees go weak with relief at the gentle understanding in his voice. So what happens now? Carlos asked. Now that I know the truth. Isabella looked around the transformed garage, at Diego watching them with innocent curiosity, at Carlos whose life she had irrevocably changed. Now, she said with a smile that felt like sunrise after the longest night, we find out if a friendship that started with a broken motorcycle and a storm can survive the truth. Carlos studied her face for a long moment, and Isabella held her breath, waiting for his judgment. Then, slowly, Carlos smiled, the same warm, genuine smile that had welcomed her into his garage that stormy night. I think, he said carefully, that if we're going to be friends, we should probably start by having an honest conversation about what friendship means to both of us. Isabella laughed through her tears, relief flooding through her like warm sunshine. I'd like that very much, she said, but I should warn you, I'm probably going to need some lessons. It's been a long time since I've had a real friend. Diego, who had been silent through this entire exchange, suddenly piped up with the wisdom that only children possess. Papa always says that the best friendships are when people help each other become better than they were before. Maybe that's what happened with you two. As Isabella looked at this remarkable father and son, she realized that Diego was absolutely right. Carlos had helped her remember what it meant to be human, what it felt like to be valued for who she was, rather than what she owned. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had helped him remember that sometimes miracles do happen, that good people deserve good things, and that the universe has a way of bringing the right people together at exactly the right moment. You know what? Isabella said, her heart full of more hope than she had felt in years. I think this might be the beginning of something wonderful. And as the three of them stood in the bright, warm garage, the billionaire heiress, the honest mechanic, and the boy who believed in magic seeds, Isabella knew that she had finally found what all her wealth had never been able to buy. A real family, built not on blood or obligation, but on the simple, powerful foundation of genuine care for one another. The storm that had brought them together was long over, but the sunshine it had revealed was just beginning to change all their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Sometimes, the most valuable things in life come disguised as breakdowns on rainy nights, and sometimes the people we're meant to help are the ones who end up helping us find our way home. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of the newly expanded Mendoza family auto repair, casting golden rays across a garage that had become the heart of a thriving community business. The sound of laughter mixed with the gentle hum of well-maintained equipment as Carlos supervised two new apprentices, while Diego helped organize tools with the precision of a seasoned mechanic. Ms. Isabella, Diego called out as a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Look what I learned. Isabella Romero, dressed in jeans and a simple t-shirt that would have shocked her former business associates, smiled as she watched Diego demonstrate how to properly calibrate a tire pressure gauge. The boy had grown taller in the past months, but more importantly, he had grown in confidence. The shadow of worry that once haunted his young eyes had been replaced by the bright enthusiasm of a child who knew he was safe, loved, and had a future full of possibilities. Very impressive, Professor Diego, Isabella said with genuine pride. So your papa has taught you well. Carlos emerged from beneath the hood of a vintage car, his face bright with the satisfaction of meaningful work. The chronic stress lines that had once marked his features had softened, replaced by laugh lines, and the healthy glow of a man who could finally sleep peacefully at night. Isabella, perfect timing, he said, wiping his hands on a pristine shop towel. I wanted to show you the latest customer reviews. We're booked solid for the next 3 weeks. But Isabella wasn't looking at the computer screen Carlos was gesturing toward. Instead, her attention was captured by something far more precious. A framed photograph that sat prominently on the main workbench. It showed Carlos, Diego, and herself at Diego's elementary school graduation ceremony the month before. They stood together like a family, which, in all the ways that mattered, they had become. "How was your morning meeting with the foundation board?" Carlos asked. Following her gaze to the photograph, Isabella's expression grew thoughtful. In the months since their friendship had begun, she had quietly revolutionized her approach to philanthropy. Gone were the impersonal charity galas and tax-deductible donations made from a distance. Instead, she had begun what she called ground-level giving, personally identifying people like Carlos who needed help and finding ways to provide it while preserving their dignity. "Actually," Isabella said, a mysterious smile playing at her lips, "I have some news. The board approved my proposal for the Honest Work Initiative. We're going to identify small business owners across the city who embody the same values you do, Carlos, and help them succeed." Carlos stopped working and looked at her with amazement. I mean we're going to find more people like you, people who choose kindness over profit, who treat their customers like family, who give more than they take." Isabella's voice grew passionate. "There are Carlos Mendozas all over this city, struggling to survive while making their communities better. It's time they got the support they deserve." Diego, who had been listening with the focused attention he gave to all important conversations, suddenly spoke up. "So you're going to plant magic seeds everywhere?" Isabella knelt down to his level, her heart swelling with affection for this remarkable boy, who had taught her more about wisdom than any business school ever could. "Exactly, Diego. We're going to plant magic seeds everywhere, and you know what the best part is? What? You and your papa are going to help me, because who better to recognize good people than the two best people I know?" Carlos felt his throat tighten with emotion. 6 months ago, he had been a man hanging on by a thread, struggling to keep his head above water while maintaining his integrity. Now he was being asked to help guide a philanthropic initiative that could transform countless lives. "Isabella," he said softly, "when you first told me who you really were, I was angry, not because you had helped me, but because I thought it meant our friendship wasn't real." "And now?" Isabella asked. Though she could see the answer in his eyes, "Now I understand that friendship isn't about being equal in what we can give. It's about being equal in how much we care." Carlos gestured around the thriving garage, then toward his son who was already sketching plans for new tool arrangements. "You gave me back my dreams, Isabella, but more than that. You gave Diego a future where he can dream his own dreams." Isabella felt the familiar sting of tears, but these were tears of joy rather than the lonely sorrow that had once been her constant companion. "You know," she said, "there's something I never told you about that night in the storm." Both Carlos and Diego looked at her with curious attention. "I wasn't just lost because my motorcycle broke down. I was lost in every way that matters. I had money, success, everything the world said should make me happy, but I felt empty inside. I was driving around in the rain that night because I couldn't bear to go home to my empty apartment and my empty life." She paused, looking at the two people who had changed everything. "When I walked into this garage, I thought I was just looking for someone to fix my bike, but what I found was a father and son who showed me what real wealth looks like. You taught me that the richest person in the room isn't the one with the most money, it's the one with the most love to give." Diego, with the directness that only children possess, walked over and took Isabella's hand. "Are you still sad and empty?" he asked with genuine concern. Isabella looked around the garage that had become her second home, at Carlos, who had become the brother she never had, at Diego, who had become the light of her life. "No, sweetheart," she said, squeezing his small hand. "I'm not empty anymore. You and your papa filled up all the empty spaces in my heart." "Good," Diego said with satisfaction, "because Papa says that when people aren't sad anymore, they have more room to make other people happy too," as if summoned by his son's wisdom. Carlos joined them, and the three stood together in the center of the garage that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely family. "So, what's next for us?" Carlos asked, and Isabella noticed how naturally he said, "us," as if their partnership in both business and life was the most natural thing in the world. Isabella grinned with the excitement of someone who had found her true purpose in life. "Next, we change the world, one honest person at a time. We find every Carlos Mendoza in this city and show them that good people don't have to struggle alone. We create a network of businesses built on integrity, kindness, and community support." She paused, looking at both of them with eyes bright with possibility. "And we do it together, as a family, because that's what we are now, isn't it? A family that chose each other." Carlos nodded, his heart full to overflowing. "A family that chose each other," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." Diego, not to be left out of this important moment, raised his small hand as if taking an oath. "I promise to keep planting magic seeds wherever we go," he declared solemnly. Isabella and Carlos looked at each other and burst into laughter, the kind of pure, joyful laughter that fills spaces and hearts and makes everything feel possible. As the afternoon sun slanted through the garage windows, illuminating the three figures standing together in friendship and love, Isabella reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. She had started that stormy night as one of the loneliest people in the world, despite being surrounded by wealth and success. Now she was part of something infinitely more valuable, a family built on choice, strengthened by adversity, and dedicated to spreading the same kindness that had brought them together. The motorcycle that had broken down in the storm 6 months ago now sat in the corner of the garage, fully restored and gleaming like new. But Isabella never rode it anymore. She had discovered something far better than a machine to carry her through the world. She had found people who would walk beside her no matter where the journey led, and as the three of them began planning their next adventure in changing the world one person at a time, Isabella knew with absolute certainty that the storm that had seemed like the worst night of her life had actually been the beginning of her real life. Sometimes miracles come disguised as disasters. Sometimes the help we think we're giving turns out to be the help we needed to receive, and sometimes the people we rescue end up being the ones who save us. In the end, Isabella Romero learned that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property or business empires. The most valuable inheritance is the ability to recognize goodness in others and the courage to nurture it until it grows strong enough to change the world. And in a small garage in a working-class neighborhood, surrounded by the people who had taught her the true meaning of wealth, Isabella finally understood that she was the richest woman alive.